The name's Paul, Pixel Paul, and this is my James Bond gaming special. Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. You know my name, I'm the man they call Pixel Paul. Thank you for pressing play and thanks for joining me on this special James Bond video. Yes, this is a video that I've been wanting and waiting to do for quite a while now. When I first sort of came up with doing this channel and bringing making ideas for what I could maybe do in future months, this was one of the first ideas that I'd actually had. So I put it off for a while, but I really wanted to do it, so I've got it done now. This is it. Hope you enjoy it. What is this video going to be about? Well, obviously all about James Bond 007. So I am a huge fan of James Bond and the James Bond movies. I've loved them since I was a kid. We'll go into that in a little bit detail more in a bit. But yeah, we'll have a quick look at some of the films and then we're going to move on to some of the gaming history of James Bond as well. So without further ado, grab your vodka martinis, shaken not stirred, and let's get into it. Safe to say I won't be having another one of those. Anyway, let's get into it. So James Bond, me and James Bond 007, what is it? Why do I like it so much? Well, it goes back to, I would say, around the mid to late 80s. I can't pinpoint an actual year really. I want to say maybe around 1986. So the first experience I had of watching a James Bond film was I went round to a friend's house. I think we were supposed to be going out or something like that, but he was in the middle of watching a James Bond film, and that film was Live and Let Die. So I'd never really seen a Bond film. I was kind of aware of Bond at the time, but not massively. But my friend was really into James Bond. He had like a James Bond watch and all sorts. And he was about halfway through watching Live and Let Die. And I kind of sat down with him and started watching it. And I think it was from around the sort of alligator farm part, followed by the speedboat chase. And I just got drawn into it and got really hooked and loved it. So yeah, from there, I don't think I necessarily went out looking for other Bond films to watch or anything like that, but I was certainly then sort of more aware of when A View to a Kill came out. I didn't go and see that at the cinema or anything, but I remember at the time, I think there was some chocolate biscuits in the UK called Trios, and you could collect tokens and get a poster from the View to a Kill film, and I think I'd done that, so I kind of knew about that film. But my first cinematic experience of watching Bond was The Living Daylights. So yeah, I'd seen that at the cinema, went to it. I think it was another friend's party or something like that, a cinema party. So we went to see that. And I must admit, when I watched The Living Daylights as a kid then, I wasn't particularly blown away by it. I think I remember thinking it was a little bit dull actually. Probably didn't quite appreciate it for what it is. So that was the first cinematic experience of watching Bond. After that, again, probably veered a little bit away from it because the next film was Licence to Kill, and in the UK that had a 15 age certificate on it, so I couldn't go and watch that at the cinema. So after that, the first sort of real experience of watching Bond was probably GoldenEye, going to 1995. But in between then, I can't remember which TV channel it was in the UK that was showing them. I presume it was probably ITV. They had like a Bond marathon, if you like, and they were showing them I think every sort of Saturday night, and I really got into watching all the Bond films then. So starting with the Connery films, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, and then obviously did not got to Pierce Brosnan at that point, but yeah, I think I watched all of them then, and from that moment I was really hooked on them. Absolutely loved all of the films. At that age, I wasn't as critical perhaps, but yeah, loved all of the films, and that's when my love for the James Bond movies really sort of developed. So that's my love of the Bond films. I was going to give you some of my sort of favourites as well from the Bond films, and I've got them all lined up there. Don't know how well you can see them, but I've got them all on DVD. Some of them I've got on Blu-ray, but most of them I've got on DVD. So my favourite Bond, I suppose that's the best place to start. So my favourite Bond, probably because in a way he was the first one that I saw. So Roger Moore. I love the Roger Moore Bond films. They are, of the sort of all the actors, they are probably the most fun and maybe light-hearted, apart from one or two of them. For Your Eyes Only is a bit more serious, perhaps. But yeah, Roger Moore was my Bond in a way. My first Bond that I sort of watched. And yeah, I just think Roger Moore was such an absolute legend, such a gentleman. And yeah, for me, Roger Moore is my Bond, my favourite Bond. I do like Timothy Dalton. I think Timothy Dalton was sort of cut short in his prime, all because of the sort of legal wranglings with the movie studios. He was due to do a third film, I think, but sort of politely declined to do it and let like a new era usher in. I think that's the story, or that's how it goes. So I do like Timothy Dalton as well, and of course I like Sean Connery too. Daniel Craig I was a bit not sure about. Yeah, I'm still, possibly because of the familiarity of those films. The other films I've seen so many times, Daniel Craig films I've seen less perhaps. And of course Pierce Brosnan as well. And as a gamer, for me, probably Pierce Brosnan, and probably for a lot of people, Pierce Brosnan is the Bond that they most recognise, or when they think of the character James Bond, they think of sort of Pierce Brosnan's look, if you like. So, and that's because of how many games he sort of featured in too. So, but yeah, for me, Roger Moore was the man. He was the guy. Favourite Bond girl? Well, probably I would say Vesper Lynd, played by Eva Green in Casino Royale. I think she's absolutely stunning. She was great in the film as well. But I always have a thing for Barbara Bach in The Spy Who Loved Me as well, playing Agent Triple X. So those are probably my two favourite Bond girls. Favourite villain? So the obvious choices are sort of like your Goldfingers, perhaps, or even Dr. No or Blofeld. But for me, just because of the pure, almost like psychotic nature of him and the way he's played, and he's also one of my favourite actors, and it's Christopher Walken in A View to a Kill, playing Max Zorin. View to a Kill it's a tough film to watch at times because Roger Moore was so sort of old in that, possibly too old for the role. But Christopher Walken as Max Zorin just lifts that film. He's the main sort of focal point in that film, and he holds every single scene that he's in. So I think he's brilliant in that film, and such a sort of mixed up character in his head. And yeah, I just love I love Christopher Walken in that. Favorite Bond themes. So I am a bit of a rock guy, so I do tend to love the more rocky sort of tunes, Live and Let Dies, that sort of thing. Chris Cornell's You Know My Name from Casino Royale is probably up there. That's one of my favourites. But also Aha, The Living Daylights as well. Possibly partly because that song plays out pretty much through the rest of the film. It sort of influences the score throughout that film, and that's one of the things that sort of lifts that film for me as well, The Living Daylights. So I do like that. So obviously now we'll go on to which are my favourite Bond films. I've gone for 5. I'll show you 5 of my favourites, and I'm thinking, yeah, these are probably in order too. So I've gone for GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan. Obviously you've got to have Goldfinger in your top 5. Absolute classic with Sean. Spoken about this one already. The Living Daylights. I really do appreciate this film now. I think it's an amazing film. Brilliant Bond film. I think Timothy Dalton is fantastic in it. Amazing score, like I said. Yeah, love The Living Daylights. I think it's a very underrated Bond film. And then the newest, probably choice of this lot, Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. Amazing film. After the absolute disaster of Pierce Brosnan's last film, which we'll talk about maybe at some point, Die Another Day, which is a horrible, terrible film. Yeah, Casino Royale was just absolutely fantastic. Everything about this film is just brilliant. Love it. And then my favourite Bond film, probably because I think it incorporates every sort of element of James Bond. There's a serious side, there's a comedic side, gadgets, guns, cars, bad guys, underwater lairs, amazing Bond girls, just brilliant stunts. Jaws as well, not the shark, Richard Keel obviously, and it is The Spy Who Loved Me. I just think this film has everything a Bond film should have, and I absolutely love it. I just think it's brilliant. So that is my favourite all-time James Bond film. But all of those 5, I could watch any of those quite easily, over and over again. So that's probably enough of the Bond films, if you like. This is a gaming channel. If you are new to this channel, of course, and didn't realise this is a gaming channel, but you know, if you are just a Bond fan or a film fan, I hope you enjoy it still. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. But yeah, we'll move on now to have a look through the Bond games. Cheers. Oh, okay, so the Bond games. So, James Bond has a massive history with video games, and the very first Bond game, I think, goes back to, and I do have notes, I couldn't remember all this in the top of my head. The first Bond game goes back to 1982 with a game called Shaken Not Stirred, which was on the ZX Spectrum. I've never seen this game, never heard of it before. It was only when I was doing a little bit of research for this. But yeah, that was one of the first, if not the first, Bond game that he sort of starred in. So we are going back quite a way. Now, the games that I've got here, they kind of start at a certain point. And I've got these games because I have the games consoles and I can play them. So there are some Bond games that I don't have that I could play because I've got the consoles, but I don't have yet. 2 of them. I think it was 2 of them. No, possibly 3. So the ones that I have, excuse me, the ones I don't have are James Bond Jr. on the Super Nintendo and NES. It's still a Bond game. 007 The Duel, which is one that I am actively looking for, and that's on the Mega Drive, but there is a Master System version as well, I think, but I am actively looking for that Mega Drive version of The Duel. And then there is a James Bond 007 game on the Game Boy too, which is not quite as easy to find, and I'm probably unlikely to be able to afford that one as well. So those are the games that I'm still sort of looking for, but there was loads of games before those as well. Lots on like the Commodore 64, the Atari ST, the ZX Spectrum. There's loads of games based around Bond and some of the sort of film licenses from around the 80s. But I haven't got those. I've got sort of more of the later lot. And obviously, there's only one place I can start. And it's probably the one that reinvigorated Bond in the video game scene. And you know which one I'm talking about. GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo 64. So this was released in 1997. And I would go as far to say this was possibly the saving grace of the N64. It was sort of flagging a little bit from its release. It was sort of playing catch up with the PlayStation at that time as well, possibly even the Dreamcast as well. But it was probably when GoldenEye came out that this game just made the N64 explode a little bit. It really kind of reached out to people who had completely dismissed it and got people back onto the N64 and got, you know, sales of probably the console going up. And yeah, it's a fantastic game. It sort of redefined or helped redefine the first-person shooter genre. At that time, there were so many different first-person shooters coming out. It was such a boom time for that kind of game. You know, you had Half-Life, you had Quake, you had Doom sort of still evolving, you had System Shock, loads of first-person shooters. But for home consoles, GoldenEye was the one. It's the one that sort of really made that genre of game really popular, and it sort of brought back the whole multiplayer, local multiplayer as well. You know, after that, you know, so many games came out that were sort of 4-player multiplayer, and everybody was talking about playing, you know, 4-player GoldenEye as well. So yeah, it's an absolute classic game. It still just about holds up these days as well. There have been remasters, which we'll touch on in a bit. But yeah, it is a classic. GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. The next up, its follow-up, and it surprised me actually that this was the next game after GoldenEye. But I mean, in the sort of timeline of Bond and the Bond films, it makes sense. But for some reason I thought maybe there'd been another game in between, but there hadn't. And that game is Tomorrow Never Dies on the PlayStation. And this was a PlayStation exclusive. It only came out on PlayStation. And this was a bit of a disappointment after GoldenEye, really, and I think most people would admit that, would agree. It's a third-person game. Came out in 1999 it came out, sorry. Like I said, I can't remember all of these facts off the top of my head. I'm not that much of a, you know, there's only so much memory I've got up here. But yeah, it was a bit disappointing, this one. Third-person shooter, this one as well. There was no multiplayer with it either. So all the things that sort of made GoldenEye on the N64 great kind of went missing from this game. It's not a bad game. It's not a bad game at all. It's just not. It's not that great. It's just okay. And I think probably going back over a lot of these games, they all suffer from that comparison to that GoldenEye N64, which is possibly a little bit unfair, especially with some of them. Some of them are, really good games, but back in the day when they were reviewed, the comparison goes straight back to GoldenEye 007. So, yeah, Tomorrow Never Dies, though, was just a slightly sort of disappointing follow-up to it. The next game after that, of course, then, was The World Is Not Enough. Now, this is the PlayStation version. There was also an N64 version. This came out in 2000. And again, sort of mixed reviews for this. Again, no multiplayer. Return to sort of first-person shooter view for this one. And the PlayStation version isn't that great. The N64 version is pretty good, to be fair. I prefer the N64 version. You'll have to let me know in the comments which version you preferred if you played them both. But again, it was okay. Not great, but okay. But this PlayStation version was just sort of lacking. And the N64 version definitely had the edge over it. But again, it's a solid game. Just a shame, again, there was no multiplayer. It just seems strange that they kind of ditched the multiplayer for those two games. But anyway, so that was The World Is Not Enough. The next game... and there aren't many sort of spin-off games in the 007 gaming world, but this is one of them, and it is 007 Racing. Again, on the PlayStation. Again, I think this was an exclusive for the PlayStation, sadly. It has nothing to do with racing. It's not a racing game particularly. It's more like sort of Spy Hunter, and it's pretty ropey. It's pretty shoddy. This came out in 2000 as well, so the same year as The World Is Not Enough. It was a bit of a cash-in, obviously. I mean, it's great driving around in the BMW and the Aston Martin and the Lotus, but it just looks pretty ropey. It's not very interesting. It's a bit of a shame, really. But yeah, 007 Racing has nothing to do with racing. It's just got 007 cars in it. So yeah, that was the first spin-off, and probably the first real disappointment in the Bond game series. Alright, so the next game, and we're moving into a new generation now. This game was released on the Xbox, the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube. And yeah, again, this was a slightly sort of disappointing game perhaps. Released in 2001. Originally it was going to be developed as a PS2 version, I think PC version of The World Is Not Enough. They were going to adapt that again just for the sort of newer console and for the PC, but in the end, for whatever reason, it turned into this game, and that is 007 Agent Under Fire. And again, this is not a bad game. It's just not a great game. It just lacks something. One thing it does lack is any sort of likenesses to the characters or actors from the film. So Brosnan wasn't involved in this one. Judi Dench wasn't involved. I don't really know why. I couldn't find out what the reason for that was. Obviously something to do with licenses probably. But this was, it's not a great game. One of the first Bond games as well to sort of be based on, not based on a movie. So it's like an original title, if you like. And yeah, it's okay. It's not great. It is a first-person shooter, and it does have a multiplayer in it. But again, the multiplayer was, from what I remember, a bit lacking. I only ever played it in two-player, but it was just a bit lacking. But not bad, just not great. So Agent Under Fire. Right, and then moving on. So now we're going into... They really put some money into these ones. They put a lot more effort into these games, I think, moving forward. Most of them, anyway. And this game, I think, after GoldenEye, a lot of people, if you say to people, what's your favourite James Bond game, but apart from GoldenEye, most people, I think, say this game. So this game came out in 2002. Again, it came out on the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and also the Nintendo GameCube. And it's 007 Nightfire. And yeah, this is a good game. It's a brilliant game, actually. Really enjoyed playing this back in the day. I have actually played this within the last year or two, I think, as well. I've not played the Cube version, but I have played the PlayStation 2 version. But yeah, Nightfire, really good game. For my money, penny, it's probably as close to sort of GoldenEye as you can get without the remakes, if you like. A lot of the sort of HUD looks very similar, and just the weaponry is quite similar as well. So yeah, Nightfire also has those really amazing car levels as well. So a bit like 007 Racing, it's a bit like Spy Hunter in a way. You sort of play with the car, going through sort of a linear track, shooting stuff as you go along, and it's very sort of action going on everywhere. So yeah, Nightfire, just really good game, that one. Very good first person shooter, and yeah, I'd say probably the second best Bond game ever made. Next up, and so this is a bit of an unusual one because again it's kind of not based on a film. This came out in 2004, Xbox, GameCube and PlayStation 2 again. This was a move backwards again. The type of game sort of flick back and forth between first person shooters and third person shooters. This one was a third person shooter, and it is 007 Everything or Nothing. And yeah, again, a bit like some of the others. It's not a great game, it's not a bad game. It is just a solid game, really. Without the 007 license on it, possibly it would have been completely overlooked. But with the license and the character likenesses as well, I mean, there's a pretty solid cast in this as well. So if I remember, I think Shannon Elizabeth was one of the Bond girls, and Heidi Klum. Willem Dafoe was the bad guy in it. Richard Kiel came back as Jaws, and you also had sort of main characters. Brosnan's in it, Judi Dench again. I think John Cleese is in it as R as well. So overall, it just makes for a very sort of Bond experience, and it is a decent game. It's a decent game, just not excellent or anything like that, but another solid sort of entry in the Bond game series. Sadly, the same can't be said about this next game. So this game came out in 2004, and for years before, there'd been loads of talk about, remaster GoldenEye, can we have a GoldenEye 2 or something like that. Everybody was clamouring for a GoldenEye game, and what we got was this. So this came out in 2004. It came out on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and it is GoldenEye Rogue Agent. Now, I did consider not including this within the Bond game, but it is a Bond game. Just Bond isn't really in it. You play it from the perspective of the bad guys, basically. You play as the villains. And I always think this is kind of like the game that when, I think, was it Bono and Tina Turner were doing the song for GoldenEye, I think they'd assumed when they wrote that song that maybe GoldenEye was going to be the bad guy, when he wasn't. GoldenEye was just a jewel in a sort of gadget that operated a satellite. Not quite as interesting as being a bad guy, but you would sort of assume maybe GoldenEye was going to be a bad guy, and in this game he is, because he's got, look, a golden eye. And yeah, this is a pretty poor game, not very good at all. It just literally is a bit of a cash grab, using the Bond GoldenEye license to maybe try and grab people. It didn't work. People didn't see through that, and yeah, it's just a very poor game. First person shooter. Nothing to do with the original game, nothing to do with the film, and yeah, just a poor one, and one that we just kind of forget. Next up, so this one's always, I think people thought this was a bit of a surprise actually, because it just sort of came out of nowhere. Very random license as well, so it's based on one of the early films. It came out in 2005, Cube, Xbox, PlayStation 2. There was also a PSP version of this as well. And the game is From Russia with Love. Now, I think people who are like Bond films but aren't massive aficionados, is that the word? Probably look at From Russia with Love as being like one of the more sort of boring 007 films. It's not. It's a very good espionage film, an excellent espionage film, in fact. But so yeah, it's not maybe like a natural fit for a video game, but it works brilliantly. There's a few sort of liberties taken with it. I mean, he uses the jetpack in it, which he used in Thunderball, and he also drives in the Aston Martin DB5, which didn't come until Goldfinger. So there's a few liberties taken with it, but it's a very solid, decent game. Third-person shooter, so you get the likeness of Connery, and this was actually Sean Connery's last time sort of playing the character, because he provided his voiceover work for it as well. So this was the last time he played Bond as well. So for that as well, just yeah, it's a great game. It's a good game, this one. I do love this one. Very underrated, very under the radar, and for my money, one of the better sort of James Bond games, really. Okay, again, we are moving up a generation and a little bit of a gap between the last game from Russia with Love, which was 2005. We move on to 2008 with this game. By this point, Daniel Craig has taken the reins as James Bond, but there was no Bond game based on Casino Royale. So the next game was based on Quantum of Solace, which is not one of my favourite sort of Bond films. Of the 5 he did, it's hard work. Quantum of Solace, it has its good moments, but Quantum of Solace, the game, is, I think, quite decent. Partly because it does incorporate a lot of flashback missions from Casino Royale. So they kind of merge, although it's called Quantum of Solace, there is a merging of the two sort of Bond films into this game, and I think it makes for a decent game. It's a third-person shooter this time, and in general, I think it's done pretty well. Reviews for it were pretty damning, actually. They were pretty scathing of it, and I don't really know why. I think there's a lot, again, a comparison back to GoldenEye, which is a shame because it's a completely different game. It's a third-person shooter, but in general, yeah, I think Quantum of Solace was a pretty dull film, but made for a very decent game in the end. So yeah, I do quite like that one. Next up, though, and of course, I should say as well, that was Activision's first use of the license as well. So after From Russia with Love, EA didn't have the license anymore, and Activision picked it up, and I think got off to a decent start with that. They did, however, then go back in time. So all those years of people clamouring for a remake of GoldenEye, and eventually in 2010 we got it on the Wii, which was possibly a surprise, but I suppose GoldenEye was on the N64 originally, wasn't it? So maybe not. But we got GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo Wii. And we also then got GoldenEye Reloaded on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. I think, was there a DS version? No, there wasn't a DS version for this. No. So GoldenEye on the Wii and the other two. So, yeah, this is a decent game. It is a complete sort of remaster of the original in a way. The difference being that they brought Daniel Craig into it, which is a bit weird actually. So Daniel Craig is in it rather than Pierce Brosnan, but it still works. I mean, at the core game is still sort of more or less the same. Obviously, with the Wii version, you've got the motion controls, which work pretty well in general. The remastered GoldenEye game on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, sharper graphics and probably sort of tighter controls, if you like. But yeah, it's just a bit weird having Daniel Craig in it. All the other actors in the game, or Sean Bean and some of the other guys, they've all been sort of recast, if you like, and revoiced. So that's a bit weird as well, just having completely different looking actors playing characters that you sort of know from the GoldenEye movie and playing in the GoldenEye game. But overall, the core game is still there, and it's a decent remaster of it. If I had to choose between these two, I'd probably choose that one. But that is still a decent game as well. And of course, that came. I think there was a golden joypad that came with this at one point as well, a special limited edition of it. I'm sure had like a golden joy controller for the Wii. I think I could be wrong there, but I think I'm right. So yeah, GoldenEye finally got its second day, and yeah, decent games. So next up, and I'm hoping that pile doesn't fall over, moving into 2010. So we move back to a third-person perspective for this game, and this was the first sort of non-licensed or original story game since Everything or Nothing, and it's Bloodstone. And this is the PlayStation 3 version. There is an Xbox 360 version and a Nintendo DS. I knew there was a Nintendo DS game for one of these. So yeah, there's a DS version of this as well. So yeah, Bloodstone, back to third-person shooter. Daniel Craig in it again. It's not set. It's not based on a film, but it's set storyline-wise between Quantum and Skyfall. So there is kind of an element of the Daniel Craig films in there, but it is an original story. And again, it's not too bad. Joss Stone was in this, and she sang the theme song for it as well. And just about gets away with it. She's certainly not like Madonna in Die Another Day. But interestingly as well, this was Bizarre Creations' last game. So it was published by Activision, but Bizarre Creations were involved with the development of it, and it was the last game that studio made before disappearing, sadly. So Bloodstone, it was all right. It's again a decent game, not brilliant, but sadly that is the sort of last Bond game. Well, it would have been if it hadn't been for this last one. And we don't really want to talk too much about this one because it's not very good. Released in 2012, PS3, 360 and the Wii U. Not the Wii, it came out on the Wii U. This could have been a good idea. It sounds great on paper, but sadly it just did not quite happen. It didn't work. The game is 007 Legends. So again, Daniel Craig sort of likeness in it. The idea behind this game was that you basically play through missions from each of the 6 Bond actors. So I've written them down. You had Goldfinger for Sean Connery. You had On Her Majesty's Secret Service, obviously, for George Lazenby. Moonraker for Roger Moore. Why would you choose Moonraker? License to Kill. Okay, 50-50, but License to Kill, the most American sort of made Bond, so it kind of I suppose it brings in that audience, perhaps, I don't know. And then Die Another Day for Pierce Brosnan. Later on, Daniel Craig got a look in with Skyfall, which was I think it was downloadable content. So it's almost like a greatest hits James Bond game, and it just never works. It's dull. It's just not very fun to play. I mean, the missions that they chose for each of the actors is questionable. Like I say, Moonraker for Roger and Die Another Day. I don't like Die Another Day. If you may have noticed that, it's my least favourite Bond film, and Moonraker is not far behind it, which is a shame because I really should like Moonraker because everybody likes Moonraker, but for me it just doesn't quite work. It was of its time. Obviously, it came out around when 2001 was out, Star Wars, sci-fi was the thing, and it's not really a Bond film, or it never feels like a Bond film, it just feels like a sci-fi film, but it does have a great score, I'll give it that. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, 007 Legends, excuse me, it's a poor game. It's just a really disappointingly poor game. Could have been great, but not very good at all, and it is a shame that from then, 2012, up to 2024, we've not had a Bond game since. It's incredible to think, actually, that it's 12 years since this came out, and we've not had a Bond game since. Bizarre, really. And I suppose that takes us to where are we now with James Bond and gaming? Well, the rights are no longer with Activision, and currently a Project 007 is in the works with IO Interactive, I think they're called. That was sort of announced a few years ago, but it's gone very quiet on that front. And I would imagine probably we won't hear anything until they cast the next Bond and we know a little bit more about what the next Bond film is going to be. So until then, Project 007 appears to be in a bit of limbo. And it's a bit of a shame, really, because, we need more James Bond games. So that is it. That is the Bond games that I have. I am still looking to get a couple of other James Bond games, that Mega Drive game especially, the 007 The Duel. I am got my eye on that, and I will be trying to pick it up as soon as I can. But yeah, I just really love the series, really love the character, love most of the games, love most of the movies, and long live James Bond. Let's hope that they can get the new actor in as soon as possible. Be interested to know who you think should be playing Bond next. Who would be your choice of actor for James Bond? Me personally, I think Henry Cavill was made for the role, whether he's too old for it now, which sounds daft because he's not that old, but if he's too old, if they want to have so many films with him, maybe that is opportunities maybe bypassed him perhaps, but I think he was made for the role, and so I'd love to see him personally. But what other actors maybe? Do they go for someone a bit younger perhaps? We'll see. But yeah, it's interesting, and I don't see James Bond ever sort of going away particularly. I think there will always be James Bond films, and I'm very thankful for that. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you're here because you're a Bond fan, then I hope you enjoyed the sort of Bond loving. If you're here for the gaming, I hope you've enjoyed looking through those Bond games. If you're here for both, I hope you've just enjoyed the video. If you have, give it a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscription button, and I will see you again very soon.